Welcome to Lord Nightmare channel. We share scary stories with rainy ambience. I hope this video helps you in some way to sleep, relax, or just be entertained for a while. If you enjoy it, please think about subscribing and hitting the thumbs up button to help my channel out. Now let's begin.
It all started about 6 months ago. I had just gotten into the habit of taking long walks in quiet places to clear my head. Late nights always seemed to bring me clarity, and the more desolate the location, the better. That's how I ended up at Maplewood Mall, a place I hadn't thought about in years. You've probably heard of it, an old mall that used to be bustling back in the early 2000s but had since fallen into decline. Stores closed one by one, and by the time I graduated high school, it was practically abandoned. The only remaining tenants were a discount furniture store, a nail salon, and a thrift shop near one of the side entrances. Most of the building had been left to rot, with metal gates pulled down over storefronts and dust collecting on what was once polished tile floors. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to go there that night. Maybe it was nostalgia or curiosity. Maybe I just wanted to be somewhere no one else would bother me. Whatever the reason, I found myself pulling into the empty parking lot just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The parking lot was massive but eerily empty, with cracks in the asphalt and weeds sprouting through them. I parked near the main entrance, where I could still see the faint glow of a fluorescent light flickering above the doors. My car was the only one there, which was unsettling, but I convinced myself it added to the peacefulness. The mall was open, technically. The furniture store and nail salon still operated until 9 p.m., so the main entrance remained unlocked. I stepped inside, greeted by the faint smell of mildew and dust. The air felt stale, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the building's dying HVAC system. I started walking, hands in my pockets, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The place was surreal. Sun-bleached posters of long-gone stores still clung to the walls. Fake plants in cracked pots stood as sad reminders of better days. Every so often, I passed a darkened storefront, the metal gate pulled down like a mouth sealed shut. My own reflection in the smudged glass startled me more than once. As I wandered deeper into the mall, I felt a growing unease. It wasn't just the emptiness, it was the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned my head quickly, thinking I saw movement in my peripheral vision, but there was nothing. Just shadows dancing in the dim light. I told myself I was being paranoid. It's just an old mall, I thought. It's supposed to feel creepy. I kept walking, drawn toward the central atrium where the food court used to be. It was a large, open area with a skylight above. Even in the dark, I could make out the outlines of tables and chairs stacked against the walls. In the middle of the atrium was a dry fountain, its once elaborate sculpture now chipped and covered in graffiti. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, like the shuffle of footsteps on tile. I froze, straining my ears. It came from one of the hallways leading off the atrium, the one to my left. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to investigate. Logic told me it was probably just someone else exploring the mall. Maybe a worker from the thrift store or someone cutting through to the parking lot. But deep down, I felt something was off. I took a step toward the hallway, my sneakers squeaking on the floor. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing. No response. Just silence. I'll admit, my heart was racing as I entered the hallway. The farther I went, the darker it got. Only a few overhead lights were still working, casting dim pools of light along the corridor. On either side of me were more closed storefronts, their glass windows cracked or smeared with grime. Halfway down the hallway, I stopped. There it was again, the sound of footsteps, this time more deliberate. They weren't my own. They were coming from behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone. But the hallway was empty. "Is someone there?" I asked, my voice a little shakier now. No answer. Just the faint hum of the lights above. I decided to keep walking, picking up my pace. The unease was turning into full-blown fear. The sound of footsteps started again, but this time they weren't behind me. They were ahead, around the next corner. I stopped and held my breath. I was torn between wanting to leave and wanting to see who it was. Against my better judgment, I crept forward, staying close to the wall. As I rounded the corner, I saw nothing. The hallway ahead was just as empty as the one I'd come from. But then I noticed something strange. One of the storefronts, a boarded-up clothing store, had its gate slightly ajar. I could see the gap just wide enough for someone to slip through. My curiosity got the better of me, and I approached it cautiously. "Hello," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. I pushed the gate open a little more and peered inside. It was pitch black, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw rows of empty clothing racks and broken mannequins scattered across the floor. The air was colder in here, and the smell was worse, like something rotting. That's when I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It wasn't words exactly, just a low, breathy sound, like someone exhaling in my ear. My blood ran cold, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. I didn't care about finding the source anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. I turned and started walking quickly back the way I came. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, I froze. Standing at the far end, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching me. My first instinct was to call out, but fear kept me silent. The figure didn't move, didn't say anything. I could barely make out any details, just the silhouette of a person. For what felt like an eternity, we stood there, neither of us moving. Then, without warning, they stepped backward, disappearing into the shadows. That was it for me. I bolted. I ran as fast as I could, my footsteps echoing wildly as I made my way back to the main atrium. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and peeled out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. I haven't been back to Maplewood Mall since that night. I've tried to rationalize what I saw, telling myself it was just another person, maybe a squatter or another urban explorer. But deep down, I know it wasn't. There was something wrong about that place, something that didn't want me there. And whatever it was, it's still there, waiting in the dark. It was one of those nights when I just needed to get out of the house. The week had been long, and I had a list of things to grab from the mall. Just a couple of items, nothing that required more than an hour or two. I pulled into the parking lot around 9 p.m. The mall was pretty quiet. The usual after-dinner crowd was gone, and the stores were beginning to close. A few stragglers wandered around the halls, but it was mostly empty. No big deal. Just how I liked it. I headed into the entrance by the food court. The place always felt different at night, especially when it was quiet. The overhead lights had that hum that gets louder when there aren't many people around. It always made me think about how empty the place could be if something went wrong, like a fire or a lockdown. I don't know why that thought crossed my mind, but I pushed it away. I wasn't there to think about anything weird. I grabbed what I needed, some shoes from the sneaker store, a book from the bookstore, and a few toiletries from the pharmacy. By the time I was done, the mall had that strange feeling of being too quiet. The stores were starting to shut down, and only a few people lingered. The security guards were walking their rounds, and I overheard one of them mention something about the mall closing in an hour. That's when I noticed it. There was one person standing by the escalators near the back end of the mall. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as I walked by, I realized the person wasn't moving. Not even a little. He was a man in his mid-30s, standing completely still with his back to me. His clothes were ordinary, a worn hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, but something about him didn't feel right. It was like he was too still, like he was almost blending into the shadows. I tried not to stare, but as I passed by, I noticed something odd. His hands. He wasn't holding anything, but his fingers were twitching, like they were tapping something invisible. I glanced back for a moment, and the weirdest thing happened. He was staring at me now, his eyes fixed on me even though he hadn't moved an inch. A chill ran through me, and I quickly looked away, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But the feeling didn't go away. I decided to head toward the exit. It was getting late, and I didn't want to be in the parking lot too long. I figured I'd make a quick exit and head home, but as I turned the corner near the main hallway, something was off. I saw another person sitting on one of the benches by the fountain. It was a woman, probably in her late 20s, dressed casually in a jean jacket and leggings. What made me pause was how still she was. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was just sitting there, staring straight ahead, blankly. Not even blinking. I had a feeling that the guy I'd seen earlier wasn't the only one giving off that strange vibe. My instincts told me to leave fast. But as I walked past the woman, my foot hit something soft, a small, forgotten bag. It had fallen from her lap, but she didn't seem to notice. I bent down to pick it up, and as I did, I caught a glimpse of her face. She looked wrong. Not in an obvious way, but in a way that I couldn't explain. Her eyes were too wide. Her expression was empty. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at anything, really. It was like she was in a trance. I quickly straightened up and hurried away, telling myself I was just imagining things. But the longer I walked, the more I started to feel like I wasn't alone. Like there were eyes on me from every corner, watching me from the shadows. I reached the exit doors and my heart sank. They were locked. The mall was supposed to close at 10 p.m., but now, only 30 minutes earlier, the doors were already locked. I didn't see any staff around, no one to ask why the doors wouldn't open. Panic started to settle in. I walked back toward the food court, but the place felt different now. Empty. Unnervingly quiet. That's when I saw it, the guy from earlier, still by the escalator. But now there was something wrong. There were no guards around, and the mall was pretty much empty. Yet, he was still standing there, completely still, just staring at nothing. My legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, but I forced myself to walk closer. That's when I saw something that made my stomach turn. Behind him, just barely visible, there was a door I had never seen before. It was at the far end of the mall, near a storage room. I had walked past that hallway 100 times, but I had never noticed that door. And standing in front of that door were 3 more people. All of them dressed like the guy, like regular people, but eerily still. One was a woman, another a man, and the third was a child. All facing the door. All standing motionless. It was like they were waiting for something, or someone. But what could they possibly be waiting for at this hour? I felt a sharp pang of fear. I knew something was wrong. I didn't belong there anymore. I turned back, heading for the escalator. That's when I saw one of the security guards walking toward me. I couldn't help myself. I ran to him, trying to explain that the doors were locked, that something strange was going on. He looked at me like I was crazy. "The mall is closed. You need to leave," he said in a voice that was too calm, too flat. But when I looked back, the other people were gone. Just vanished. I tried to ask about them, about the people by the storage door, about the locked exits. But the security guard gave me this cold stare. He didn't even acknowledge anything I said. He just nodded toward the exit and turned away, like I was just another annoyance. I didn't wait for him to finish his shift. I ran out of that mall faster than I ever had before, barely glancing back at the shadows behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one who had ever felt this way about that mall. And maybe, just maybe, those strange people weren't just figments of my imagination. To this day, I haven't gone back there after dark. I'm not sure what happened that night, but every time I think about it, I wonder if I was the only one who saw them, or if I was just the one who noticed. It was late, way later than I expected, when I found myself walking through the mall. It was a Tuesday, and I had one last errand to run, pick up a few items for a friend's birthday. Nothing big. The mall was relatively empty when I walked in, but that was nothing unusual for a weeknight. Most of the stores were closing soon, and the few people left were mostly wandering, checking out things they had no intention of buying. I always liked the quiet of the mall at night. It was like the noise of the day faded away, leaving a sense of peace, just a bit of music from the stores, the soft shuffle of footsteps, and the occasional murmur of a conversation. But tonight was different. From the moment I walked in, I felt this odd sensation, like I wasn't supposed to be there. It was subtle at first, like a tinge of unease, but I brushed it off. Everyone gets those feelings, right? I wandered through a few stores, picked up the gift, and was on my way to the exit. But as I walked past the food court, I noticed something strange. It was the way the lights flickered for just a second. I stopped and looked around, wondering if maybe it was just a power surge. But as I stood there, I felt watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was looking at me. I scanned the area. The food court was nearly empty, save for a single person sitting at one of the tables near the corner. It was a man, mid-40s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He sat alone, a coffee cup in front of him, staring down at the table. His hands were still, not moving at all, just gripping the edges of the cup. The weirdest thing was that his posture was so rigid. His body was perfectly still, like he was frozen in place, waiting for something or someone. But what made me feel uneasy wasn't just the stillness of his body. It was the way he was staring at the table, almost as if he was trying not to look up, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my overactive imagination. After all, people do weird things sometimes, right? I turned toward the escalator, ready to leave the building. But as I stepped closer to the stairs, I heard a soft shuffle behind me, almost like a footstep, followed by a strange rustling sound, like fabric brushing against something. I froze. I didn't turn around at first. I didn't want to. But then, instinctively, I glanced back. No one was there. I took a deep breath, telling myself I was just paranoid, and continued walking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavier, like the mall was holding its breath. I had that nagging sensation, like someone was following me, or worse, someone was waiting for me. As I reached the exit doors, something strange happened again. They were locked. I tried not to panic, thinking maybe the mall had closed early or that I was just misremembering the time. I turned around and noticed a security guard standing at the end of the hallway, leaning against a wall, his arms crossed. He looked like he had been there the entire time. His face was expressionless, and he didn't make a move when he saw me looking. I walked toward him and said, "Hey, the exit doors are locked. Can you help me?" The guard didn't respond. He just kept staring at me, still leaning against the wall, as if he hadn't heard me. I thought maybe he was tired or just didn't care. Excuse me? The doors?" Before I could finish, he straightened up and finally spoke, but his voice was flat, almost robotic. "The mall is closed. You need to leave. Just go to the main exit." His tone was cold, emotionless. I didn't argue. I turned toward the other side of the mall, hoping that the doors there would be open. As I walked, I heard another rustling sound behind me. My heart skipped a beat. It was the same sound, like someone brushing against fabric. But when I glanced over my shoulder, there was no one there. I quickened my pace. I passed a few more stores, each one darker than the last, the lights flickering in a way that was almost rhythmic. But then, just before I reached the main hallway, I noticed something that made my stomach churn. The man from the food court. He wasn't sitting at the table anymore. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, staring straight at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. The worst part? He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, his face expressionless, not even acknowledging the world around him. I stopped in my tracks. A cold sweat formed on the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. Why was he standing there like that, He had been in the food court just minutes ago, but now he was in the hallway, staring at me like he had been waiting for me to notice him. My hands began to shake. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being stalked. The man didn't move an inch. He just stared. And then, without warning, his lips twitched into a faint smile. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was like something snapped inside of me, and without thinking, I turned around and sprinted toward the exit. I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me, matching my pace, but when I dared to look over my shoulder again, there was no one there. The man had vanished. I reached the exit doors again, and this time, they opened. I ran out into the parking lot, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around to see if anyone else was still there, but the parking lot was empty. Completely empty. The mall had that eerie silence, the kind that felt unnatural. I glanced back at the darkened windows and the glowing lights above the entrance. It was like the mall itself was waiting for me to leave or maybe for me to come back. I never returned to that mall after dark. And to this day, every time I pass it, I can't help but wonder, was it just a strange coincidence? Or was there something or someone waiting for me inside? Have you ever experienced something eerie in a place you thought was completely normal? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Who knows, maybe your experience will be featured in a future video.